What's the scariest story you've ever heard that still makes your blood run cold? A hunter was lost in the woods at night and had nothing useful to help him survive. He arrives at a glade, and in the middle of it there was a wooden cabin. Scared, tired, and desperate for shelter, he walks up and tries the door. It was unlocked. Inside, he finds a table, a candle with matches, and a small bed. He lights the candle, looks around, and stops in shock. Dozens of paintings of menacing, angry faces stare at him from the walls. Trying not to look at them, he climbs into the bed and eventually falls asleep. He wakes up the next morning with the sun on his face. How is this possible, he thinks. I didn't see any windows last night. He looks around only to realize that the paintings were not in fact paintings. They were windows. Story 2. There was a story about a young Chinese couple who had been dating for a few months. The young man had grown tired of the girl and decided to break the relationship off. Heartbroken, the girl offed herself while wearing a red dress, which in Chinese lore means she plans to return as a ghost in the state of her violent death in 7 days to haunt him. The young man, obviously scared, went to consult a sensei about his newfound troubles. The sensei told him that the only way to get away from the ghost was to hide under his bed when she came, as she would leave once she couldn't find him in his room. As the evening of the 7th day approached, the young man hid under his bed as he was told. As soon as the clock struck midnight, he heard familiar whispers from outside his bedroom. He knew she had come. He would be safe, he thought. She wouldn't find him under the bed. The doorknob turned. The door creaked open. The next day, the sensei tried calling him to see if the trick had worked, but there was no answer. He rushed to the man's apartment. The door was ajar. He went straight to the bedroom and found the young man already passed under the bed, his face twisted in fright. This can't be right, he thought. She wouldn't have seen him if she had come into the room. Then he found a newspaper clipping of the self-offing incident in the house which the young man had kept, and he figured it out. She fell head first, and she came haunting his bedroom upside down. Story 3. About 10 years ago, I was recently divorced and living alone in a one-bedroom apartment. The place was clean, and the rent was decent. One of those buildings with a doorman. I felt safe here. I was alone and loving it, focused on my career and not on my clingy ex-husband. Things were finally looking up for me. At the time, I was working late at the office and would often stumble into my apartment, sleep-deprived, in the early hours of the morning, then wake up by 6:30 or 7 to start the day. I started noticing that in the morning my door would sometimes be unlocked. I usually dismissed this as my sleep-deprived brain, thinking the bed looked more appealing than locking the door. Another thing I noticed since moving in was that I seemed to misplace things more than I used to, little things like a hairbrush or nail polish. It wasn't a big deal, just a slight annoyance in my day. The longer I lived there, the more frequently I seemed to forget to lock the door. At first, it was every once in a while, then it became an almost daily occurrence. More things went missing: pictures, shaving razors, and, most disturbingly, my underwear. This went on long enough that I started to get paranoid. I started taking the time at night to make sure the door was locked. I got into a habit of, every night after locking the door, turning the handle 3 times and saying to myself, "It's locked, it's locked, it's locked." Time after time, I would wake up and the door would be unlocked. One time, I even tried staying up all night to watch the door, but I ended up falling asleep in my chair. I decided my mind was not reliable enough to stay up all night, so I invested in a video camera. I went all out and bought the fanciest camera I could get my hands on. One night, I set the camera up facing the door, hiding it under a pile of towels on the floor. I locked the door and went to bed. When I woke up, my apartment looked normal, nothing missing that I could see. I decided to check the tape. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, seeing nothing. I was just about to give up when I noticed the door handle jitter. Then it slowly crept open. A figure slid through the half-open door and walked toward the camera. It paused, looking around as if listening for something, then walked forward into direct view of the camera. I paused the tape. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck rose. I was staring directly into the face of the building's maintenance man. I could see his thick glasses and curly hair. I had no doubt who it was. I played the tape a little more. He looked completely comfortable as he walked around the apartment. then turned and walked toward my bedroom, out of the camera's view. I didn't know what to do. Sobbing, I called the police. I tried to explain over the phone but couldn't. Soon, 2 officers arrived at my doorstep. I told them everything and showed them the tape. I remember seeing the blood drain from their faces. They promised I was safe and that they would get this guy. I needed to lay down but didn't want to be alone. One of the officers offered to stand outside my apartment door while I took a nap. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep but too drained to move, something kept nagging at me. I tossed and turned for a few minutes, unable to get comfortable or rest. My mind was racing. Then a realization slowly washed over me and chilled me to the bone. We had watched the tape and saw the man enter my home, but we never saw him leave. I froze, then started shaking. I needed to get to the front door. I sat up and looked around the room. I couldn't see anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed cautiously. My feet hit the cold wood floor, and I felt warm breath on my ankles. I raced out of my apartment as fast as I could to the safety of the police officer. He called for backup. They found the man under my bed, clutching a knife and a Polaroid camera. Story 4. A young girl named Lisa was often left home alone because her parents worked late. To keep her company, they bought her a dog. One night, Lisa was awakened by a constant dripping sound. She got out of bed and went to the kitchen, thinking a tap had been left running. She turned it off and returned to her room. As she climbed back into bed, she reached her hand underneath it, and her dog licked her fingers. A few minutes later, she heard the dripping again. This time, she went to the bathroom and found another tap that wasn't fully closed. She turned it off, returned to bed, and once again felt the reassuring lick of her dog's tongue beneath the bed. But the dripping continued. Thinking the sound might be coming from outside, Lisa checked the outdoor taps and made sure they were all turned off. She returned to her room, slipped into bed, and reached her hand underneath it. Again, the dog licked her hand. Still, the dripping persisted. Drip, drip, drip. Now fully awake, Lisa listened carefully and realized the sound was coming from her cupboard. Slowly, she walked over and opened the door. Inside, she found her dog inside, lying upside down. On the cupboard door was a message written in blood. Humans can lick hands too. Story 5. A man was driving his usual route along the highway when he noticed a turnoff leading into the mountains. He passed it regularly but had never taken it, even though it would only add a few hours to his trip. On a whim, he took the exit and began driving up the winding mountain road. He had started later than usual that day, and dusk was settling in as he approached the higher elevations. Still, the scenery was breathtaking. As he continued, he felt a slight chill run down the back of his neck but dismissed it as the cool mountain air. Not long afterward, he rounded a bend and had to slow down. Ahead of him was what appeared to be a terrible car accident. 2 vehicles were completely wrecked, looking as though they had collided head-on just beyond the curve. Several bodies lay scattered on the ground nearby. His first instinct was to pull over and help, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the scene was wrong. Not just unusual, wrong. A deep, instinctive sense told him that what he was seeing wasn't natural. He decided to drive past the crash site and park a short distance beyond it before getting out to help. As he slowly crept by the wreckage, he managed to get a better look at one of the bodies. It was definitely human, but something about it seemed wrong. He still couldn't put his finger on exactly what. He rolled the car forward another few meters and prepared to stop. Just as he reached for the door handle, he glanced through the windshield. Night had fully settled in now, and the road ahead was nearly pitch black. Then something caught his eye in the rearview mirror. Several somethings. Staring into the mirror, he felt a surge of horror. The bodies at the crash site were illuminated by his taillights. They were sitting up. Every one of them was facing his car. Their eyes reflected the light like glowing orbs in the darkness. Panic gripped him as more figures began emerging from the ditches and the forest lining the road. They stepped silently from the shadows, moving toward the wreck. But it wasn't until the crash victims themselves began to stand, smoothly, effortlessly, without limping or showing any sign of injury, that he finally snapped into action. With trembling hands, he threw the car into drive. By the time the first figures began taking slow, deliberate steps toward his vehicle, he was already speeding around the bend, racing down the mountain as fast as he could. Nothing ever came after him, and there was never any indication that he had been followed. Sometimes he wonders whether his mind played a trick on him that night. Maybe the darkness, the isolation, and the shock of seeing what looked like a horrific accident combined to create something that wasn't really there. But even now, years later, he always checks his rearview mirror before stepping out of his car. Story 6. A teenage girl is called upon to babysit some kids on a Friday evening. Apparently, she watches these two girls pretty regularly. The parents leave for the evening, saying they won't be home until around midnight. The teenager puts the two young girls to bed around 9 p.m., then does what most people would do, goes downstairs and watches TV for a while. She watches TV for an hour or so, and by this point, it's getting pretty late. She's in the living room on the main level. The TV sits in the corner of the room with large windows on each side of it. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she sees what she thinks is someone walking outside the window through the bushes. Naturally, she gets pretty freaked out and ends up calling 911. The police arrive, check outside, and don't find any signs of anyone walking around, probably because it was winter with snow on the ground. They assure her she's safe and that the lighting from the TV and a lamp probably played tricks on her by reflecting off the window. The teen agrees that's probably what it was, but asks them to check inside the house just to be safe. The police reluctantly oblige and start randomly checking rooms, closets, and the garage a bit haphazardly. They roll their eyes, wondering how much the girl's imagination has run wild. But then, they find a man hiding under one of the little girl's beds. As the story goes, it was the little girl's mother's ex-husband. The babysitter hadn't seen someone walk past the window outside. What she actually saw was the reflection of him walking behind the couch. Story 7. This happened to me, and it still freaks me out whenever I'm home alone. When I was 16 a few summers ago, my parents went out for the day and my sister left to go out too. I live in an average small suburban neighborhood. I was stuck in the house, bored, with my dog and nobody else home. It was really hot in the living room, so I turned on the air conditioner. To do that, I needed to open the garage door because the back of the air conditioner faces in there and the garage gets overheated. Usually, we lock the garage door that leads into the living room, but this one time I forgot. I sat down in my room and relaxed, not thinking much of it. Bad idea. A few hours later, in the afternoon, I heard my dog barking like a maniac. I almost ignored it but went into the living room and heard the doorknob on the garage door jiggling. I assumed my sister had come home, so I yelled, "It's not locked!" She didn't respond. The doorknob jiggled more violently. I walked over and went to the door, yelling again, "It's not locked," when the door opened. It felt like slow motion. The door creaked open a sliver, and that's all I needed to see. I just saw the feet, huge, dark brown hiking boots of a man, not my sister. I immediately pushed on the door to close it and started screaming and crying hysterically. I'm a small girl, but I struggled to push it shut and locked it. He started pounding on the door, but then it stopped. Hysterically crying and screaming, I scooped up my dog and ran into the kitchen to get a knife. As I did, I heard the gate in the backyard open and quick footsteps down the cement path. Like in the horror movies, with tears streaming down my face, I screamed, "No!" Dog in one hand and knife in the other, I threw the knife on the floor and ran to lock the back door. When I quickly bent down on the kitchen floor to pick up the knife, my legs were shaking from fear. My weak legs gave out and I fell forward, almost onto my face. I tried to scramble to my feet but ended up crawling and tripping on the kitchen floor, accidentally scratching a long, shallow cut on my bare foot with the knife. I hid under the dining room table and said my prayers. I thought this was it. This is how I was going to die, here in the quiet, empty house with my dog as a witness. I held my hand over my mouth to stifle my crying when I heard footsteps approach the back door. My heart was racing a million beats a minute, and I had the knife tightly clenched in my hand as I waited for him to make his next move. I saw his shadow through the blinds, looking into the window. He stood there for a while and then walked away. The police never found him. To this day, I always make sure the door is locked when the garage door is open. I don't know what would have happened if my dog hadn't barked and alerted me that a man was trying to break in. I would have been in my room, completely unaware until it was too late. Story 8. There was this one R.L. Stine story that always freaked me out. I'll make up names and try to tell the gist of it. There was a kid, Jerry, who had to go to the hospital to have his tonsils removed, so he's staying in a room with a few other beds. There's a kid in the bed next to him called Ben, except whenever someone calls him by his name, he says, "I'm not Ben." Ben's mom tells Jerry it's because Ben has to have his leg amputated and he does not want to lose it. The night of Ben's surgery, the nurses come in to wheel Ben to the operating room, but they approach Jerry's bed. "Ah, the chart here says Ben," says the nurse, and they start wheeling off Jerry. Jerry protests, "But I'm not Ben." The nurse then says to the other, "Oh, he always says that, apparently." Jerry looks over to Ben's bed and sees Ben sitting there, smiling. Story 9. As frahis dura religia bis dironi with traditions that destillate bez, these only abused breath left to core. All right, figured I'd share one of my own. This story was told to me by my great-aunt, one of my grandmother's 9 sisters. In Cuba, where we're all from, summers tend to get hot. Coupled with the lack of air conditioning, you'd have to be wealthy to own a unit. People often sleep with doors and windows open. One night, my Aunt T was putting her grandchildren to sleep. She laid in bed with them, and they were alone in the home. One of her sisters, Berta, was supposed to be keeping them company that night, but a last-minute change made her sleep elsewhere. My Aunt T says that sometime around 9 p.m., she noticed a figure that, by her description, must have been 7 feet tall. It was human-shaped but seemed to float inside their home. If it had legs, they weren't visible because a long robe of some sort covered them and dragged along the floor. Rather than scream in fear, my Aunt T decided to lay perfectly still so as not to wake the children. She saw the figure cross the hallway and head into her room, looming ominously over them. The face, she described, was that of a pale woman with big red lips and hair in dreadlocks, like that of a Rastafarian man. There were just shadows, cavities, as she called them, where her eyes would have been. The figure left her room the same way it entered, but didn't leave the house. My aunt's house is large, and she swears she saw the figure go in and out of each room, taking roughly the same amount of time before finally gliding out the front door. My aunt cries to this very day because the next morning her sister Berta was found dead. Everyone assumed it was a heart attack or stroke in her sleep, as no one heard anything, and they found her exactly where she had lain the night before, lifeless. My aunt swears the figure must have been death itself searching for her sister where she should have been. Story 10. Last year, I worked with a guy who'd spent some time on oil rigs in the North Sea. He told me about a huge storm that had pounded one of the rigs. It happened all the time there. The next morning, they had to assess the damage and saw that one platform down by the water was partially submerged. Normally, it's just above the waterline. Being low on the totem pole, he went down first. He told me the whole thing was a death trap, the platform barely hanging on. When he got to the bottom, where the rest of the platform was in the water, as soon as he stepped onto it, it started sinking fast. He had to run up the stairs, and when he reached the landing above, the entire section under him broke off and sank. But what got me was when he said it didn't just sink. It was like the metal was pulled until it broke, like something enormous grabbed it from underneath and dragged it down. And whatever it was, it only did that when he stepped into the water, like it had been a trap. He told me that after that, they kept getting damage they couldn't explain. Metal ladders broke, pipes sheared off, always during storms. Sometimes men went missing, which was the worst. They told the media they had to evacuate because of a leak, but that wasn't the real reason. Eventually, the whole rig was going to go down. He said the same thing had happened to other rigs in the North Sea. I don't know whether he was lying, but I thought it was creepy. Story 11. I knew a girl who said that, while home alone, she heard a tapping sound on the kitchen floor coming from the basement. Worried it might be a leaking pipe, she used her house phone to call her dad. He told her not to worry about it. After hanging up, her cell phone immediately rang. It was her dad, telling her to call the cops and get out because he heard someone breathing on the other end of the line. She got out of the house and called the police. The cops arrived, searched the house, and found a psycho in the basement with a machete. Apparently, he had been tapping it against the basement ceiling to lure her downstairs. If she had gone down, she probably would never have come back up. Story 12. I remember reading a creepypasta about a guy on a train. He takes the same train or bus every day and begins to notice a strange man who rides it constantly, never seeming to leave, and whom no one else seems to notice. Eventually, he ends up following this man all the way to the end of the train line at the end of the day. He follows him into an old train tunnel or subway system and ends up losing him and getting lost himself. He manages to get back to the surface, only to realize he is no longer in his own dimension. The only way he can return or move to another dimension is by getting someone to follow him into the train tunnel or system. Because these beings look so different, he must sit perfectly still until they can almost no longer see him. So he sits on the train day after day until someone eventually notices and starts to follow him. And if anyone can find that story again, that would be amazing. It was a great read. Story 13. The plaintiffs extraidi 16 and verhanatali diomentuin hears the shoes mofords the sharding six of teof the anandai gomes vadelu bedelai demod dawawan the desinisectionits do versi gaiuthas cablevo for the desistem de shro extaba of a destemti this and tiu on the altar dieth. My cousin was in a band and did some touring for a while. He ran into another band from the Illinois area that had a creepy story to tell. They spent their days on the road and didn't make much money, so they always depended on fans to find places to stay. After playing a show, there was a particular fan who seemed really interested and offered them a place to stay. His parents were very involved in their church and usually absent from the house. The band members were curious about this, so they asked if his parents were on a mission. He just awkwardly smiled and didn't answer. Later that night, the band members got hungry and thought about raiding the guy's fridge. However, they decided not to since he had been such a good host and they didn't want to be rude. A few days later, they saw a story on the news about a man who had offed his parents. The person arrested under suspicion was the guy they had stayed with. His parents had been in the freezer when they had thought about raiding it. Story 14. This was told to me by my aunt. My apologies for any lack of detail, as my grandmother died years before I was born. Also, I do not know how true this is. First, my mother was one of 10 children. When she was a teen, her parents and half of her siblings moved to the east. My aunts and uncles have told me that something strange happened around that house. They would hear voices, running upstairs when no one was there, a rocking chair would rock when no one was in it, and so on. Eventually, my grandmother was diagnosed with brain cancer. She was in her bed at home recuperating from her most recent surgery, and my aunt was there alone taking care of her. My grandmother was completely bedbound at this point. It was impossible for her to walk. She had a funny tendency to blot at her healing incisions on her scalp with tissues, which was not great for them. Because of this, the tissue box was kept across the room from her bed. My aunt brought in my grandmother's lunch on a tray and set it down on her lap. My grandmother asked her for the tissues for her head, and my aunt reminded her that she was not supposed to do that. My grandmother then asked for a drink. My aunt went to the kitchen and brought back her drink, only to see her mother with the tissues, still in bed, blotting her head. My aunt took them away and again reminded her that she should not do that. This is when she realized that my grandmother could not get out of bed, so she asked, "Mom, how did you even get these?" My grandmother replied, "Oh, that little girl that always follows you around gave them to me." Story 15. So, here's a story of my friend. He lives in an apartment complex in the city. The place is 10 stories high, and he lives on the 8th. One night he was going home and arrived at the main lobby at around 11 p.m. He waited for the elevator, and when the door opened, a man rudely bumped into him and hurriedly walked out of the lobby. My friend didn't think much of it until he got back to his room. As he looked into his bathroom mirror to brush his teeth, he found bits of blood on the very shoulder the man had bumped. The next day was a Saturday, and he was getting ready for a date. He had just taken a shower when he heard a knock on the door. Peering through the eye hole, he saw a policeman. The policeman was a guy in his mid-40s, with short dark hair, with a shaved-off left eyebrow. The policeman asked through the door, "There was a murder last night at around 10:50 p.m., and I would like to ask if you saw anything in particular." My friend did see something in particular. He bumped into a man that bloodied his shoulder, but he replied, "No, sir, I know nothing of the sort. My friend was already late for his date and didn't want to get involved." The policeman responded, "All right, thank you for your time," and left. My friend went to his date and came back home later that day feeling a bit guilty. He lied to a police officer. Then he flicked on the TV and the news was talking about the murder at his apartment. Great, he thought, way to make me feel more guilty. But then the news went on to say that the killer was caught. The culprit's photo came on the screen, and there the murderer was. A guy in his mid-40s, with short dark hair, with a shaved-off left eyebrow. He wasn't a police officer. He was a man who was out to off the witnesses. Story 16. Veliferid stedina voliza sext, a flyna the maintue. A flyna the melaria behazem torwals to miti. Wafanisham thadashom, on the pritifrolai to buridimawan sin subpainti canal an asgabio. This is not a story actually happened to me. I was visiting my grandmother in Mexico City. She had a great, big 2-story house and we were upstairs on the floor with the bedrooms. It was really late at night and my grandmother was already asleep. I was up watching TV when I heard an animal roar really loudly outside through my open window. This was no normal roar. It was really loud. The closest thing I could match it to was a lion or a tiger. It was really weird because this is in the middle of a gigantic city, nowhere close to wilderness. The zoo is also halfway across town, so there was no chance of the noise coming from there. It kept on for a long time, just roaring and growling, and pacing in the street below my open window for more than an hour. I was really freaked out, but couldn't bring myself to look out the window. Finally, I got some balls and went to my grandfather's study, got his gun, loaded it, and went back to bed, just dreading that whatever was making that awful roaring sound would look up and notice the light coming from my open window. The noise continued for a while, until it finally began to move away. I finally mustered enough courage to look out the window, but saw nothing, but could still hear the roaring off in the distance. The next day, I scoured the newspapers and news for a story of a wild animal escaping, but found nothing. I didn't tell anybody about it for years, not sure what to make of it. To resume, was visiting Grandma in the middle of a huge city, heard a large beast prance and roar outside the house, cowered like a wuss holding a loaded gun, too scared to look outside until it moved away. Still have no clue what it was. Story 17. Forgive me if I get this wrong, it is a true story I read a while ago that made my blood run cold. A Redditor was remembering her childhood. She and her brother were playing in the home, her mother and aunt in the kitchen making lunch. As the kids were running around the house playing, the girl sees an old woman sitting in the living room. The old woman looks up at the girl and smiles, and the girl can still hear her mother in the kitchen, her brother playing outside. The old woman, still smiling, beckons the girl over to her chair and says, "Sweetie, your mother is very tired of taking care of you. She is tired and sick of having you around the house. Nobody here wants or loves you and you have to come with me. You are going to live with me now." The old woman reaches out to grab the girl's arm when the mother calls from the kitchen. The girl runs into the kitchen and tells her mom in tears about the old woman in the living room. They go look and the woman is gone. Story 18. Real story here. My dad works as a janitor for an orphanage in the city, fixing stuff and so on. The property of the orphanage belonged to an old lady who died a few days ago. When my dad first started the job, the old lady showed him around all the rooms, and when they got to the basement, my dad noticed a welded iron door. "What's in there?" he asked. "That's a private room. Nobody is allowed to go in there. It has been shut for 50 years now, and it'll stay this way." So now the old lady is dead, and the property belongs to the manageress of the orphanage. She refuses to crack the door open, even though she doesn't know what's down there. There's no key for the door. You'd have to blow it up to get in the room, as it's surrounded by 30 centimeters of concrete. It gets worse. We're in Germany, and about 3 years ago, there was an M1911 found about 3 meters in the ground above the basement room. The M1911 is an American weapon. What do you think is in there? We don't know. Me and my dad will try to go in there someday. Story 19. A young boy is sitting in class when he notices a girl of about the same age out the window and across the street. She smiles and holds a hand up, giving him the peace sign. The next time he looks, she's gone, but it looks like she dropped something. At recess, he crosses the street to where she was and finds a Polaroid picture of the girl holding up her 2 fingers like before. He can't get her off his mind for the rest of the day. There's something just a little bit off about the way she looked at him. That night, the boy wakes up to a sound outside his window. When he looks out, he sees the girl again, smiling strangely and holding up 2 fingers. He climbs out the window and begins to follow her. As he's crossing the street to where she's standing, a car crests the hill and strikes him, and he passes instantly. The driver, distraught, jumps out of his car and finds the boy already dead. In his hand, the boy is clutching a photograph of a young girl, smiling strangely and holding up 3 fingers. Story 20. I was chatting to a couple at work the other day. They come in all the time, and we got talking about weird, creepy stuff. The husband told me a tale that had happened to him. We'll call him Dave. Dave does handyman and electrical work, and one day someone rang him and asked if he could quote them for some work on their house. Dave turns up, examines the house, discusses the work, and quotes them a price, which they agree to. He then asked the customers how they found him, out of interest, and they told him an odd story. They'd been given his number by a friend, but first they had tried a number for another electrician they found in an old phone book they had, also called Dave. The first Dave had turned up, examined the house, given them a quote, seemed friendly enough, and left after giving them a number to ring him on if they wanted the work done. A few days later, they rang the number to tell him they wanted the work done. A woman answered and got angry, then upset, when they asked for Dave. After tearfully asking if they were pranking her, she explained that she was the widow of Dave, who had been dead for almost 2 years. Story 21. It may not be that scary, but it's a true story, and it happened to me, and it is one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. In 2002, I remember distinctly because it was right after I got married. My husband and I were on a road trip to visit his brother at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. This was before navigation systems were popular, so we printed the route on Yahoo Maps and were following the directions. We were pretty naive and didn't know much about the route, and at one point there were all these mountains popping up. Then I said, "I think we're driving through the Appalachian Mountains." My husband laughed at me because he had no concept of basic geography and said I was making things up. We eventually stopped at a gas station and got a map, and it turned out I was right. This particular route kept popping up, and I saw that eventually we needed to be on that route, so me being the genius that I thought I was, decided that we should just get off on that route the next time it popped up and save some time. So we got off. It was about 2 a.m., and it was pitch black, and we were in the middle of the woods. We came to a fork in the road and had no idea which way to go because we had veered off course and no longer had turn-by-turn directions. I freaked the hell out, and my husband said, "Calm down, I'll call my dad. His brain is like a map because he was a truck driver. He'll know what to do." Then we pulled out our cell phones. No reception. At this point, I was crying because I was stupid and for some reason really scared, like something was not right. Then my husband said, "My gut is telling me to go left." So we went left. Then we finally saw lights. We pulled into a gas station to get directions, and luckily this was one of those gas stations that is on the highway. You can literally pull off and back onto the highway directly from the gas station. As we approached, the attendant was outside, sitting on a lawn chair just kind of hanging out with some people. I think they were more thrown off by Latinos being in that area at that time than we were by the fact that they were hanging outside the gas station around 2:30 a.m. Anyway, we explained what had happened and my brilliant idea to get off the highway. I will never forget the look on that woman's face as she did one of those shudders, like when you get the chills and your whole body shivers uncontrollably. She looked me dead in the eye and said in the most serious and somber manner, "Never, ever get off that highway. Those are the back roads, and you don't want to know what's out there?" We got back in the car, drove off, stayed on the highway, and never looked back. If this sounds familiar to anyone, it's because there was a movie about something similar where the outcome wasn't as lucky as ours was. Note the movie came out after this happened to us. About a couple of years later, we were watching a movie called Wrong Turn. Same premise. People are lost after some accident or something, come to a fork in the road in the Appalachian woods, and they make the wrong turn. As much as I was scared at the time it was happening to us, nothing compares to the utter fright I felt after watching this movie and seeing how that played out. What if we had gone right instead of left? It was such a freak-out and out-of-body experience. I know it's a fictional movie, but knowing that I was in the same exact scenario and knowing that there was a potential for some crazy thing like that really messed with my head. Story 22. This actually happened to me. My recent ex were no longer together after what happened. Had a habit of waking up, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes after a nap, and saying weird things like she was still dreaming. I kind of got used to it. One night, I was awake reading I'll Never Get Out of Here Alive by Steve Earle when she suddenly woke up and started talking about how I'd offed a lot of people I knew and that I was dangerous. This was a lot stranger than her usual post-sleep mumblings. Freaked out, I asked, "What the hell are you talking about? Who did I kill? How did I kill them?" She replied, "You held them by the throat while they were sleeping, and you were going to do it to me right now, but I woke up." I asked if she was being serious, and she immediately burst out laughing. "No, I'm not serious, but you should have seen your face. Of course, I don't think you were going to do that to me." I didn't think it was funny at all and decided I was going to get back at her somehow, and soon. It wouldn't be difficult either. She was pretty jumpy and easy to scare. All I had to do was set something up and frighten the living daylights out of her. A few days later, while searching the internet for something genuinely creepy, I remembered a conversation I'd had with my young friend Sebastian at the local skate park. He'd told me about black-eyed kids and insisted they were some seriously scary stuff. He'd read everything he could find about them online and had even bought a pair of black contact lenses so he could dress up as a black-eyed kid for Halloween. A number of people around the world have claimed to have encountered children who knock on doors and demand to be let inside to use the phone, or approach people sitting in their cars and insist on being given a ride. According to these accounts, the witnesses don't notice anything unusual at first. Then they realize the children have completely black eyes, no visible irises, just solid black. Many of the witnesses also report feeling an overwhelming sense of fear. At the same time, the children seem strangely persuasive, as if they can influence a person's thoughts or simply will them into obeying their demands. This was it. Black-eyed kids. A plan was beginning to form. That same evening, I told her about the stories of people all over the world encountering black-eyed kids. I read several eyewitness accounts to her and talked about how it was plausible that the stories were real, that the black-eyed kids could be some kind of demons or perhaps even aliens. She bought it completely, just as I knew she would. She was a fan of ancient aliens and firmly believed in ghosts and all things paranormal. The next step involved Sebastian and his black contact lenses. We met up at the skate park as usual. I didn't have to do much convincing. The moment I explained the idea, he was on board. I reassured him that she wasn't going to do anything to him. "She'll be scared out of her mind, but she's not going to hurt you, dude. She's not going to call the cops or anything. She'll probably just slam the door shut and maybe scream a little." We agreed that he'd do it the following evening while she was home alone, sometime around 8 p.m. after dark. I gave him a copy of my key to the front door of our building so he could let himself in, climb the stairs, and knock on our apartment door without having to be buzzed in. I'd be home from work around 9 p.m. and figured I'd be available to do some damage control in case she really freaked out. The next day, when I got home, she was completely hysterical. She was shaking all over, almost convulsively, crying and screaming. "They were here! The black-eyed kids," she yelled. "I almost let them in before I noticed their eyes. Their eyes were completely black, just like the people in those stories said. They're real." At that point, I knew our little prank had gone too far. She was completely beside herself, terrified to the point that it seemed like she was having some kind of nervous breakdown. At the same time, I couldn't help thinking that Sebastian had done an impressive job. I found myself wondering which other kid he'd recruited to help. Whoever it was, they had really sold the act. I held my sobbing girlfriend and tried to calm her down. "Look, it was a joke, okay?" I said. "I had my friend Sebastian come by. He was wearing black contact lenses. That's all it was. He must have brought another kid with him who had a pair too. Look, I'll call him right now and he'll tell you himself, okay?" He didn't answer. I called again and again. After the fourth call, I left a voicemail asking him to call me back as soon as possible. A little while later, someone finally picked up. It was his mother. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. She sounded shaken, her voice trembling as she spoke. She told me that Sebastian had been involved in an accident while skateboarding that afternoon. He had suffered a fractured skull and was in the hospital. Story 23. A man went to a hotel and walked up to the front desk to check in. The woman at the desk gave him his key and told him that on the way to his room, there was a door with no number that was locked and no one was allowed in there. She explained that it was a storeroom and that it was out of bounds. She reminded him of this several times before allowing him upstairs. So, he followed the instructions of the woman at the front desk, going straight to his room and going to bed. However, the insistence of the woman had piqued his curiosity, so the next night he walked down the hall to the door and tried the handle. Sure enough, it was locked. He bent down and looked through the wide keyhole. Cold air passed through it, chilling his eye. What he saw was a hotel bedroom like his, and in the corner was a woman whose skin was incredibly pale. She was leaning her head against the wall, facing away from the door. He stared in confusion for a while. Was this a celebrity, the owner's daughter? He almost knocked on the door out of curiosity but decided not to. As he was still looking, the woman turned sharply, and he jumped back from the door, hoping she would not suspect he had been spying on her. He crept away from the door and walked back to his room. The next day, he returned to the door and looked through the wide keyhole. This time, all he saw was redness. He couldn't make anything out besides a distinct red color, unmoving. Perhaps the inhabitants of the room knew he had been spying the night before and had blocked the keyhole with something red. He felt embarrassed that he had made the woman so uncomfortable and hoped she had not made a complaint with the woman at the front desk. At this point, he decided to consult her for more information. After some gentle quizzing and the promise that the explanation would go no further than him, she finally said, "Well, I might as well tell you the story of what happened in that room. A long time ago, a man murdered his wife in there. We find that even now, people get uncomfortable staying there. But these people were not ordinary. They were white all over, except for their eyes, which were red." Story 24. Since I was about 5, every few years or so, I see the same person in my dreams. It is genderless, has pale skin, long black hair, typical ring girl look-alike, but the first time I saw it, I was 5, which was 1996, and ring girl didn't exist. Anyways, sometimes it will be in the background of my dreams. Sometimes I'll be having a regular dream, and then I get a distinct feeling that it is being interrupted. I have a brief dream where this genderless entity is staring at me, then I go back to my regular dream. The worst one was a dream where I was being chased by it. I finally ended up crouched down in the kitchen of a house made entirely of glass. It found me, obviously, picked me up, and started shaking me as the room spun around and around. All I remember is the room going around us in a blur as if we were standing still, and it, the entity, was just staring at me. We didn't break eye contact until I woke up. But I woke up because I couldn't breathe. I felt like a 5-ton weight was on my whole body. I was lying on my back. I never ever sleep on my back. Then the weight started lifting, as if someone had been lying on top of me and started to get up. The last time I saw it in my dreams was about 3 years ago. I don't think I've gone much longer than that without seeing it, so I'm afraid I am due for a visit soon. Story 25. In rural southern Illinois, a toy company began selling realistic baby dolls to expectant mothers. But apparently, after the mother had her child, the toy baby would start crying. Eventually, the rocking motion advertised to calm it down wouldn't work, and you couldn't get it to stop without shaking it. Eventually, when it started crying, the parent would have to beat it, and even then, the beatings and thrashings would have to get harder and harder to make it quiet. The only thing that seemed to shut the baby doll up permanently was to bash its head against the wall to destroy whatever mechanism triggered the crying. On more than one occasion, Neighbors called the authorities to report child abuse, and when the police arrived, they found the remains of infants. In most cases, the mother couldn't understand why the police were there. She said that she had just got rid of the stupid doll, she calmly stated as she rocked a baby-shaped bundle in her arms. Story 26. This was told by a friend who claimed it was real, then years later said it may not be. The clown mannequin? A couple hired a babysitter to watch their two children while they went out to dinner for a night. The couple told the babysitter the children were not allowed to watch television and there was only one in the house in the parents' bedroom. After the children were put to bed, she would be allowed into their room to watch TV. So the couple went out, and the babysitter put the kids to sleep and went into the couple's room to watch TV. She noticed in the room a life-size clown mannequin in the corner. A bit weird, she watched TV in the couple's room, but thought the clown mannequin was too strange, so she threw a sheet over it. After an hour, she couldn't take it anymore because of the weird feeling she got, so she called the couple to ask if she could move the clown mannequin out of the room while she watched TV. The couple told her they didn't have a clown mannequin and to get the kids out of the house as fast as possible. A couple of days later, a neighbor was arrested for dressing up as a clown and breaking into people's houses. The couple was mortified because their children used to tell them when they woke up in the middle of the night that a clown used to be in the room, staring at them or hovering over the bed, but the couple never believed them. Spooks me out just writing it. Story 27. I had a friend who grew up deep in Appalachia. He once admitted that as a child he would sometimes look up from his bed at night to see a green face watching him. It would move its mouth like it was saying something, but it was silent. He would always try to convince himself he was dreaming and would rattle off prayers until he fell asleep. It never did anything other than watch him, so he eventually discounted it as a normal phenomenon of dream time. He switched rooms a few times as he got older, and strangely, he'd stop seeing the face, but when he moved back into that room, the face would return. He'd never told anyone. His family was deeply religious, so he wanted to avoid any freakouts about demons or the devil. After college, he and his brother were reminiscing, and he finally asked his brother, "When you were staying in that room, did you ever see?" To which his brother interrupted, "A green face?" He said he turned white because he'd really convinced himself it wasn't real. Both of them were too nervous to talk about it more, except to confirm it was just a green face that watched them and mumbled inaudibly. When they visited home after that, they refused to sleep in that room. There's something super creepy about a disembodied voyeur. Story 28. I am a little late to the party, but I have always wanted to tell people about this experience I had when I was about 10. I used to have a sleepwalking problem. One night, I had a dream. In the dream, I got up out of bed, walked downstairs, and got a steak knife out of the silverware drawer. Then I walked up to my parents' bedroom and went to stand next to my dad since he was sleeping closest to the door. He woke up and said, "You okay, sweetheart?" Then I started stabbing him, and my mom woke up and I started stabbing her as well. After my little stab fest, I went back downstairs and fell asleep on the couch. That morning, I woke up on the couch, and the knife was on the freaking floor beside me. I then went into freak mode and ran upstairs, expecting to see my parents dead and covered in blood. They were fine. Everything was good. I went back downstairs and got some cereal. My dad got up a little after I did and sat down with some coffee. This is the part that freaked me out. He asked me what I was doing last night. I asked him what he meant. He said I got up, went downstairs, came back upstairs, and stood by the bed for a good 5 minutes. I asked him if he said anything. He said he asked me what was wrong, and then said I just walked back downstairs and he didn't hear another peep. Still freaks me out to this day. Story 29. Wibbleton 11 is 20 during the F in the Senate or Sinity that's. I'll be honest, I wrote this myself, and it's not the scariest I've ever seen or heard of, but I'm submitting it here anyway. It's just too bad I'm late to the party. I feel like this story has been waiting for a bigger audience if I may feel a little full of myself for a minute. Picture a beautiful sunny summer day. My wife is outside with our guests and extended family who haven't left after our cookout. I'm not feeling very well, so I lay down for a short nap, hoping I'll be more able to appreciate such a fine day afterward. I fall asleep quickly enough. Must have been more tired than I thought. I wake up suddenly. My eyes shoot open. I'm staring into the black, endless eyes of death. He just stands there, hovering over me. His face is gaunt, pale. There is the faintest glimmer of a smile playing on his lips. I know, just from looking at him, that I will not survive this encounter. But that won't stop me from trying. I realize then that I can't move. I am unable to flee. He reaches down slowly and puts his hands around my neck. He squeezes gently. I can feel the life pouring out of me into him. I somehow break the paralysis and reach up at him. I grab the robe around his neck, but it's slimy and scaly, and it feels as if my hands just pass through it. Just as I'm about to pull my hands back, he lets go and vanishes. I just lay there for what feels like forever. I finally muster the strength and courage to get up and walk out of my bedroom. My sister is sitting on the couch in the family room. She says, "I could feel him. I could feel you, dying. He wants you to know he'll be back soon." Story 30. This is a story from a friend. His parents were divorced and lived on separate sides of the country, one in New York State and the other in Utah. He would spend several weeks in Utah with his father, then drive back to New York to live with his mother. He traveled with his German Shepherd and slept in his car at truck stops with a makeshift curtain to cover the windows. One night, he was in the middle of nowhere and the dog woke him up, going bat-crap crazy, barking, growling, and yelping. He finally calmed her down, got her on a leash, and took her outside, but there was no one around except some truckers sleeping in their cabs. In the morning, he did his usual routine and used the pay shower at the truck stop. There were other guys using showers, so he wasn't alone. He rushed through the shower to be the first one out and found something written in red lipstick on the mirror. "You're lucky you had the dog last night." Needless to say, he stayed in hotels for the remainder of his journey. Story 31. My teacher was at a camp when he was young with his classmates. The owner of the camp told them that it was forbidden to go into a specific house where the windows and the doors were sealed. When they asked why, they were told that it was an old orphanage where they had been tortured and some of them offed, and now they haunted the house. Some of the guys in his class wanted to be brave and go into the house when the owner was asleep, and my teacher was one of them. When they got into the house, everything looked normal, except it was dusty as hell, since no one had been there for a long time. They walked up the stairs to the second floor, where they saw an old rocking chair. One of the guys sat down in it. He looked at the other guys and said, "The chair is warm," and looked kind of terrified. They decided to get out of the house before someone noticed them, and when they started to walk down the stairs, they heard footsteps running on the second floor. They ran out of the house and back to their cabins to sleep. The next morning, the owner came to them and asked, with a little panic in his voice, if they had gone into the house. They said no, since they didn't want to get in trouble. The owner looked a bit scared, and they asked why he had asked. He then said he believed that the children had the ability to move objects. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.